a lot of our time, most of our time, really, our brain time, developing and considering expectations, okay? Just to give you an example of this. Let's say you walk into a bathroom somewhere, not your own, like a store, or at somebody's house, because, you know, you gotta go to the bathroom. That's why you're going. And you walk in, close the door, and you see this.
Oh, yeah, turn around.
What do you expect? What do you see? Okay, and what do you feel? Let me hear it.
To fix it.
They need to fix it. Yes, I mean, you know, whatever it is, you're going to feel something about this. You might feel it met your expectations, because some people actually like it that way. That's the wrong way, you know. But some people like it that way. A lot of people don't like it that way. And see, they have an expectation over something as small as the toilet paper. But it's not spoken. You know, they didn't like walk into that house and say, I expect the toilet paper to be turned this way. And a lot of our expectations are not really verbalized. And some of them, you know, we don't even know that they're happening until they don't meet those expectations. Then we realize we had an expectation, just like the toilet paper. You're not consciously thinking about the toilet paper when you walk over to somebody's house and you go into the bathroom. It's not until that thing is not meeting your expectations, and then you deal with the expectation of the toilet paper. Okay? All right. For probably, I think about 35, 40 years, could be up to 50, I don't remember. 35, I think it's 35 because this goes back to 35. 35 years, last 35 years, there is an organization who has tested all the nations in the world for satisfaction, okay, for happiness, joy, life, satisfaction, life, happiness, okay. So they've figured out, and they actually, I don't know, about 5 years ago, they actually produced the first world map, or world happiness map, and it sits there and shows each of the country and what their percentage of happiness is, and where they rank from these statistics. For the last 35 years, Denmark has been number one. Okay? Denmark. And researchers at the University of Southern Denmark wanted to know why that is. So this was just a few years ago when they actually did this. They studied Denmark, the people. They polled them. They had them fill out questionnaires, discuss. And they compared certain statistics from Denmark to other comparable countries like Finland and what's another one up there? Sweden. Yes, Sweden was in on it. They studied 12 different factors in this research. They studied things like genetics. We're going to talk a little bit about genetics here in a little bit. Genetics does have a lot to do with behavior and, you know, psychological issues. They studied general health, because health is also very important on satisfaction, or life satisfaction, or life happiness. Okay. They also studied economy, because I thought maybe, well, you know, maybe, sorry, Denmark just has a booming economy, and we don't know, you know, we don't realize that we're better than everybody else. So they studied that, and they even studied climate, because climate again has an effect on your psychology. Okay, there's a thing, I love this, it's very interesting to me. There's a disorder called seasonal affective disorder, and I think of Yahweh when I think of this, because we need the sun, we need the light. Okay, when we don't have it, it really does affect our thinking and our emotions. And so they thought, you know, possibly climate was involved. And what they discovered here in this was that, oh, sorry. Good. Okay, see, there we go. Danes, the Danish people, have considerably and indubitably realistic expectations, because they studied expectations as well. And so they have very, very realistic expectations for the year to come. All right, they take in factors when forming these expectations of all the bad things that go on in this world and that go on in their country. They factor in the economy, health, crime, weather. The Danes do.
Yeah.
Okay? Goodness. And that is how they form their expectations. And then every year, from those expectations, every year, they then are pleasantly surprised that the state of Denmark is not getting more and more rotten like they thought it was. Okay? So they're happy. Do you see the correlation? They have figured out to set their expectations realistically. Because see, in the West, we don't really get that. We can be as evolved, psychologically mature, but we still have, most of the time, very unrealistic expectations. And we actually, I just watched this study done on children, and this is just a sidebar, but we actually kind of hurt our kids when we do this, because we set them up for all of these grand and wonderful things. You can be anything. No, not everybody can be everything. Okay? That's wrong. You can't be everything. But we tell our kids that you can. So then when they get to adulthood, they're like, well, I thought I could be a ballerina. You know? I can't be a ballerina. Sometimes you can't. So, I mean, we pump them because we're surrounded, our society, we're pumped full of positivity and all these self-help books of, you know, fix everything wrong with you by your mind and all this, whatever it is. And yeah, our brain's very powerful. But, you know, we're just always, people make a lot of money on positivity. Yeah. And so it's just shoved down our throat. So the Danish people are not that way at all. Okay? They're not. They're very realistic. They're like, you know, yeah, he could die tomorrow. He could die 6 months from now. This is what I got to look forward to. They factor in all of these things. And so when the person didn't, or they're not in the poorhouse like they thought they were going to be, they're extremely happy. And their expectations have been exceeded. Not just met, but exceeded. See, the Danes do not have an expectation gap. The expectation gap is where the frustration comes. Shakespeare once said, the expectation is the root of all heartaches. I beg to differ. It's not the expectation itself. It is the conflict between the expectation that you have and the reality that you have. That leads to disappointment, frustration, and anger, and all the other negative things that can come. The expectation gap is why you can have one guy making $75,000 and being extremely happy, and you can have another guy making $75,000 and being extremely unhappy. This is why you can have one woman getting this really nice pair of earrings, and she's ecstatic, and then another lady gets the same pair of earrings, and she's frustrated, angry, volatile, explosive, because she was really expecting that. Okay? There is only one way to get rid of the dissatisfaction from the frustration that comes from the expectation gap. We have to close the gap. And that means you have to change either your expectations or your reality. It's pretty impossible to change reality. You know, it is what it is. All right? So the next step would be to examine our expectations to see if they are actually realistic. All right. I'm going to get a drink. Just 1 second. Let's say a father tells his 2 sons to build him a cabin. All right? The first son builds a cabin, and it looks like this. second son builds a cabin, and it looks like that. What do you think about these cabins? Which one do you think is better? I mean, it might be obviously, but go ahead and tell me.
I'll take the white one.
Yes, the white one? Yes?
Me too.
Okay. In a couple of words, what do you think? What would you think about the second son? How would you describe him?
Younger?
No, they're both adults.
Oh, okay.
Okay. He could do better.
He didn't really care.
Didn't really care. Anything else?
He was making a lighthouse.
He was smoking some meat in there. Okay.
Didn't have much money.
Let's see. Next one. All right. I want to show you these two sons. All right. The first son built the first cabin with these tools, and that's him. Okay. And the second son built his cabin with these tools.
Wow.
So, now what do you think?
Now I'm impressed with the second son.
Amen. Hallelujah. Yes. Right? Do you see how your expectations changed after examining reality? Okay. I think subconsciously we all do this, what we just expressed right here, because I set that up to get y'all, okay? Because I knew you would.
Yeah.
We kind of just automatically think and expect an equal playing field, and we expect all the players to be the same. Okay? This is a simplified representation of the process of someone not meeting our expectations. We perceive what is happening, we compare it to an expectation, and then we assign a reason for the dissatisfaction that we feel because they did not meet our expectation. And normally we do this in one of two dimensions. Okay? Those dimensions are, the reasons are because of a morality issue or because of an ability issue. And we just saw how we automatically assume equality or assume equal ability. So the only thing left is the morality, the only other reason. And from that, often we are left with a sense of moral superiority. Okay? Like with the cabins. That guy didn't try. He wasn't doing it. He didn't do, the best that he could. I don't remember the other reasons that we yelled out, but they were all character issues. Were they not? Yes. And I want to kind of bring attention to that today. That's pretty much where this is going. Because when we feel morally superior to someone, it's almost impossible to feel compassion for them.
Wow.
When we look at it as a skills thing, as an ability thing, we do have compassion because we can more relate to that. Because we know for sure that we can't do everything. Most of us, unless you have some sort of inflated ego. Most of us can admit that we don't do everything right. We're not great at math. I stood up here last time and testified how bad I was at math. So we can relate to that, but how often can we actually relate to being immoral? That's a whole nother ball. Whole nother ball. So when this leads us into our next slide is the sense of moral superiority and lack of compassion. All right, that can come from that is pretty automatic. All right, this is Nineveh, and I picked some pictures. I mean, I don't know if you can see. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you want to come here later and kind of look at some of these are like wall pictorials that were found in the ancient city of Nineveh. Things up here, this around here. They had They were just all around bad people. All right. Everybody knows about the story about Jonah, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of go with the fact that I just assume that y'all know your Bible.
Thank you.
Good. That's a good expectation. So, anyway, they're all around sick and depraved people. It was very common to use human torture, human sacrifice. They did a lot of fertility practices and rituals, and I'm going to let you figure that out yourself. I'm not going to talk about that. And yet, Yahweh had compassion on them. All right. Yes, they repented. He did not want to destroy them. He didn't want to. That's why he sent Jonah to warn them, to tell them to repent. All right. So we know the story of that. At the end, he's sitting there chastising. He chastised Jonah. I mean, remember he killed his little tree or whatever vine. He killed Jonah's vine to show him an example of how much Jonah cared about the vine versus the actual human beings over here. He chastised Jonah for a lack of compassion on these sick, evil people. And they are, by our standards. I mean, can you just imagine? Sick, evil. By our definitions and our, and Yahweh's too. I mean, that's why he sent him over there to destroy him. But he did chastise Jonah for not having compassion on him. And he says to him, should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left? And many cattle too. I just really love that part. It always makes me laugh because it's like, Yahweh's like, what is wrong with you, boy? You mean just go up there and kill everybody and the dog, That's exactly, and the cows too, I always see Yahweh doing that. Because I don't understand why the cattle are in there except for that. That's just something I would tell my kids. Sorry. Here Yahweh points out to Jonah Nineveh's ability, all right? Their ability, or lack thereof, actually, is what it is. They cannot tell their right hand from their left. That's setting it straight. These people don't have the law. They don't have me. They don't have the forefathers. They don't have the patriarchs. They don't have anything. They can't tell nothing. And you can't see that in addition to a morality issue, it's also an ability issue. And that is a beautiful point that I think we all need to focus on at some point. A lot, actually. And I hopefully this lesson and this research will kind of get you there and help us all focus a little bit on that. Because once we evaluate on ability, it causes us to reevaluate our expectations, just like the cabin guys, the cabin sons. We looked at the ability of the two, and then our expectations changed and were altered. All right, now this is about the talents, and we're coming in right at the collection time. All right. He gave 3 servants, 1 talent, 2 talents, and 5 talents. Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. Yeshua tells us in this parable to help us understand Yahweh's expectations of us. If you look at this laid out, these were the talents of the 3 servants, and these were their outcomes. All right? Dropping these off, we're dropping the first one because he's just evil and wicked and he ain't getting nothing. But the other 2 guys, they got the same reward. They got the same thing said to them. Good and faithful, into the joy of your master. Wonderful. Same thing. Nothing was changed on his responses to the last 2. These are isolated. This is just what they made. These are their 4 talents and their 10 talents. Look at these outcomes. Look how much less the first guy did than the second. I want you to look at it because I'm a visual person, so I really like to see things broken down and put on stuff. That is 60% less. And he got the same rewards and he got the same comments to him. Have you ever thought of that? Have you ever broken it down that far? 60% less. What does that look like in real life terms? What does it look like that a brethren can do 60% more or 60% less than another, and both are praised on Yahweh? Equally. Yes. But do we ever look down on a brethren because we don't think that they are making the cut? Guilty.
We do. We're all guilty.
Because, they're doing things that we don't really consider anybody that is Yahweh's could be doing. Because we're judging completely subjective. 60% is a lot. What does 60% less anger look like? And all the other ways that we can mess up. Or vice versa. What does 60% less charity look like? Or love? Faithfulness, compassion, patience, kindness, discipline. What does it look like? 60% less. I mean, this guy had 4 and this guy had 10. That is a huge difference. See, what Yahweh wants, I believe, from this and other scriptures we're going to go over, I think Yahweh just wants our best. My best, your best, and your best. Yahweh has realistic expectations. Not unrealistic. We have to understand that my best is different than your best, and it is according to each ability. He does not measure us against each other. We are the only ones that do that, even though he tells us not to. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each should carry their own load. I think we forget this a lot. Mm-hmm. A lot. To whom much is given, much shall be required or expected. Can we not infer from this statement that he is telling us, to whom less is given, less shall be required? You can't have one without the other. You can't say, I'm going to expect a lot from this guy who has a lot, or who was given a lot, and not also have the mirror image of that. Then it would be just a pointless statement. Meaningless. See, here's the thing. Yahweh knows that we are all created unequal. All right, we think we're equal, but Yahweh knows that we're created unequal. The only reasonable standard is one that is able to accommodate inequality. Okay, just like the guys with the 4 and the 10. His standard was here according to his ability. And just like your children, when they grow, you raise that standard. Yes, it's always up there. It's moving with you. But it's not stagnant and stuck with all of your children who are at different developmental levels. It goes up when they go up. And it's down when they're down. When they're smaller, when they're younger. And I do believe that Yahweh tells us this. But we never focus on that. We never think about it. You know, he does this to accommodate this inequality because his creation is very diverse. All right? And what he sees and what we see are often totally different. And Yahweh knows this. For decades, psychologists have argued over nature versus nurture. Which ones is more influential or which one dominates the developmental aspects of a human being? Is upbringing or genetics more influential on development? And you can have, I'm just thinking about all the research. You have research from both sides, okay? And this has been going back for decades. You'll have, they study twins a lot. Twins, identical twins because they have the same genetics. Absolutely. So they'll have one who's been adopted out and one who hasn't. So they'll study those individuals. And they'll both come to the table with proof that go on both sides. All right, the support. They both do have supporting evidence for each view. But what's really coming down the line that's becoming more and more researched and more proven is both. Both influence how a person develops and how they become who they are. And we can see some examples of both of those in Scripture, and we're just going to go over some of those. There's a beautiful interplay between biology and environment. For example, and how they can play with each other, okay? Who's ever heard of feral children? Feral kids. They're just like wild children. Mm-hmm. It's very sad. There have been, there's not a whole lot of them, but there's been several cases over even a century or 2 centuries ago that have been documented. And in feral children, you can see this. You can see this interplay between environment and biology, or the actual organic chemistry of the person, the structure of the person. When a baby is little, there is a certain window available to build language skills. Okay, and I know you've all heard of this, that it's easier to learn a second language when you're a kid because you're all ramped up and ready to go with the language, and you're just like a sponge. Well, feral kids, they found them, and they can literally have been living in the woods for their whole life, or at least since they were toddlers or whatever. They have documented cases, real actual human beings that have been raised by animals, all right, raised with animals, by their choice or by the parents' choice. Like there was one in Australia, I think, or New Zealand, where she was, she just lived in the backyard in a doghouse with the dogs. Pretty much her whole life. And so literally she was on her, hands and knees, and she would bark and growl and attack. And then there's other children that just grew up in the woods with other creatures. Or there was this one case where the girl was about 14 years old, and she had been in a room, locked up, tied to, I think she was chained to a bed, and I think she had like a potty chair there, her whole life. And her parents lived right outside the door, in the rest of the house. And so she never had any contact. They wouldn't let any of the kids talk to her. So she never had any human contact or an environment that allowed her to learn language skills. She never wasn't. Okay, so these other kids too, all these are the same in this one respect, and that is they didn't know how to communicate. So they took them in, obviously the state took them in, the country they took them in, whatever. And they started working with them. And they went into, extensive studies, or what they could do at the time, because like one of the kids, I remember, he, and I think he was in France, and this was a couple hundred years ago, I think. They couldn't obviously study a whole lot on his brain. But the rest of them that have been around or that have happened more recently, their brains have been studied, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with their brain. I mean, as an organic entity, the structure of the brain, there's nothing wrong with the biology of the brain. So they tried to teach him language, and they couldn't. I think the best one was learned like 3 words her whole life, her whole rest of her life, from like 14 years on. Never got down past maybe like a year and a half. I mean, they learned like 3 words. They don't understand verbs or plurals or sentence structure or any of that other stuff. Never went beyond that. And yet there's nothing wrong with the brain. Nothing that they could find. It's not like she was, it was a brain injury or any kind of malformation or deformation or anything like that. There was nothing wrong with the brain. And all of these were like this. And so what happens is that window of time elapsed. It was over. And so she didn't learn language. None of them, they didn't learn language, so they couldn't progress. Because once you hear language and you figure it out in your head and you start talking, and then you build onto that, the actual structure of your language skills builds on and increases in this time frame. Well, they missed it. And so the structure of the brain was not wired and could not be wired ever again for language. Not any kind of normal range. Never. So do you understand do you get the point of how environment influences the organic or biological? Because the environment has to trigger the biologic in that specific case of language skills. In the Bible, it says, train up a child in the way we should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. We see this a lot in many other scriptures that point to this. That environment, instilling in your kids from the environment how to act will ensure their behavior to a certain extent when they get older. Because just like the language, you're putting it in them when they're ready, when they're primed for learning, and their brain is getting structured, when it is developing the foundation that it has to work on. And yet he also says here, visiting the iniquity of the fathers, and that word is ancestors, on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Here, Yahweh tells us both our environment and our biology, or our lineage, is important to our development. And it influences who we are. Psychology and science are now realizing that. All right? Slowly the argument over nature versus nurture is being settled. And more are accepting this resounding research that shows both play a part. Let's see. Sorry. All right. Now, here's another example of environment versus genetic or biologic, or the genetics of it. All right, everybody knows what DNA is. I'm not going to go, it's not going to be a science study. I'm just going to give you enough information to kind of give you the thing. because I don't want you to fall asleep, all right? So here's the deal. You know, everybody knows what DNA is, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of that. We've talked about, they use this in crime shows. Everybody knows your DNA, and we hear about it a lot. So it's kind of common knowledge. Okay. And once you have it, it's not changing. All right, it's you. It's you forever. You. It's not changing. That is your DNA specific to you. It's your genetic code that makes you you. The same genetic code is placed in every cell of your body. This DNA, okay? That's pretty fascinating. Every cell has this DNA in it, and it replicates, it duplicates to make that same cell over again. But it has the same strand of DNA. That is your DNA, okay? But it makes every cell, every different kind of cell in your body, that same thing does. And the way that happens is in the epigenome, okay? Like your genome is your structure, your genetic makeup. The epigenome, epi means on top of or above the genome. All right, epigenome is, think about this, the computer, all right? The computer, the modem, the mouse, the hard drive, whatever. I'm not a computer tech, so I'm really struggling on the terms of the hardware of the computer, but you get my gist, all right? So if you can look at your DNA like the hardware of the computer, your epigenome is the software. It's the instructions on getting the computer to do the functions that it needs to do. You understand that? This can be altered. This is passed down from your family, from your parents. The epigenome included with the genome, the actual genetic code, that can be changed. So your genes, your DNA will not be changed. Good Lord.
Did, but
huh?
That's amazing.
Yes. Okay, so, I'm sorry, I got kind of sidetracked because I don't know where I was. Your DNA strand makes the same cells. It makes the hair cell. It makes the skin cell. It makes the brain cell. It makes the stem cell with the same DNA. And the way that this happens is the epigenome. The epigenome instructs the genes that are included in that DNA on what to do. Turn off, turn on. Turn off certain genes to make the hair cell. Turn on and turn off other genes to make the skin cell. It's fascinating to me how we can have the same code produce everything in our body. It's absolutely awesome. But it's also scary that our code, the hardware, is not going to be influenced. It's not going to be changed. But the software or the instructions for the function of the hardware can be changed. It can be influenced by environmental factors. That's huge.
Wow.
Yes. Okay. Now, I know these are big words, so we're going to go slow. All right, let's take one thing now, because this is a big thing. Okay, this is a big problem that happens, and if you step back and think about it, statistically for this assembly, 50% of the people here have been abused. We're abused as children in one way or the other. All right, so it's a huge problem. And it's growing, so anybody new that comes to the door, half of them are going to have this problem. So it's good to kind of get at least a cursory understanding of it. So I'm going to use, yes?
And is that true, like, generally everywhere and not just here? You're saying, like...
Yeah, no, everywhere. Okay. In the United States, sorry.
Okay, no, I just wanted to clarify.
Just here.
In the United States.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so anybody from the United States walking in this door, half of them are probably abused at some point. in their childhood to adolescence. So I'm going to use this because it's a big, big problem that we have. And, you know, there's usually two schools of thought out here. I hear from people, you know. I've heard it both. Why can't you just get over? Why can't they just get over it? I mean, why are you still crying about something that happened 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago? I understand, and that's usually from people that weren't abused, all right? Because they don't get it, they don't understand. So hopefully this will bring a little bit of light to this. There was a study done on kids, and some of the kids were abused and some were not. It was kind of hidden from the researchers. How am I doing on time? What time is it?
Oh, you're good.
Okay. They wanted to know if there was a biologic or genetic marker to abuse children. Okay, can we figure out, can we determine or see under a microscope, can we see the evidence of this abuse? And the answer is yes. One of the ways this can be seen is through the gene expression. Okay, so that's the turning on, turning off. All right, you can see the little light switch here. The gene expression of a gene called NR3C1. NR3C1 kind of acts like a docking station for a hormone called cortisol. Okay, and we produce this in times of stress. It's natural for us. Yeah, we put it in us so we could survive, you know, to protect. We get very vigilant. We get very focused. We get to where we brace for the threat. You know, you've heard about fight or flight. This is one of those that kicks that in, all right, so you're prepared. Physiologically, these kids, their bodies prepare for threats. When you are abused, anybody that's abused, especially long term, you can be living in this. You can be living with this hormone pumping through your blood on a regular basis. I mean, on a constant basis. And it is good. It is good to a certain extent. It is good. And likely those children need it. You know, they need to be ready and prepared. And it's very sad that they have to stay that way. But at the same time, while it's acting good and it gets you focused, I mean, we learn about this in law enforcement because we have to look at the different things that happen to your body when you're under stress. And one of them is that, you know, that you get focused, you get prepared, you get, at some point, you get like a tunnel vision, and that's pretty much all you see. You are focused on that. That's what I mean. And vigilant and prepared and ready for this threat. In these kids of this study, the NR3C1, the docking station for this cortisone, because once it's released, it pumps through your blood and gets your body ready. Okay, but when things are calming down, it goes and settles and docks. That's what I'm using the term as, docking in the NR3C, whatever, NR3C1. I can't hardly say that. So it docks there, all right? In these kids, that's turned off. The cortisol can't settle back down. They can't come back down. They can't handle the stress like everybody else does because they have an equipment failure. Because the expression in the gene has been influenced by the environmental factor. Does this make sense to y'all? Do you understand how the environment makes the mechanism act up?
It triggers it. Wow.
It turns it off, turns it on. And this is not just this. This is one case. I'm talking about like maternal or paternal or any kind of familial love. It turns on, and without it, it turns off. In all other kinds, in other kinds of genes, it turns the gene on that helps regulate the stress in the individual. it changes that and turns it off to where the hormone, the cortisol, is continuing to pump. It doesn't have anywhere to go. It's supposed to go into the bloodstream when there's a stress and go into the docking station of this gene when things are down, so it can settle down, so it can regulate the body. But with this, it's like the adrenaline. Okay, it's your adrenaline has nowhere to go. It's just completely spinning around. Does that make sense now? That I kind of regulated it, I mean, equaled it to adrenaline. So they have a problem with self-regulation or stress regulation because their equipment inside their brain structure is not functioning like people who have never been abused or people who have not suffered. So let me just use Deborah. Deborah, if you had me and you, and you'd never been abused, and I have, you would be able to self-regulate. You have the equipment in your brain to self-regulate better than I do. Okay? Does this make sense to y'all? I know this is, it's deep, but it's beautiful. There is a beautiful symmetry that he created that we are influenced by love and not. We are influenced by our environment, just like the language skills. They cannot build them past this point. And sometimes some things that happen to you, they don't just mess up your emotions. They mess up the structure or the design and the function of your genes on a cellular level. It's not just like that they're acting out. It is like inherently in them a problem with the mechanism. See, these kids, when they suffer this, they go into, and this leads into sometimes in adulthood, like a hyper readiness, a hyper vigilance. Mm-hmm. Okay? They're always on. They're on a lot. I mean, on, like turned on, like ready and bracing. And it's very hard for them to bring it down a notch or two because their equipment that causes that bringing it down a notch is malfunctioning. It's hobbled. I mean, it's not the only one that docks cortisol, that hormone that brings us into getting prepared for a battle. But it's one of the big ones. And without it, or without it functioning properly, it hobbles their ability to self-regulate and deal with the stress. So, these kids, they're wired for the threat, basically, in not so many terms. Right? They're prepared to respond at the first glimpse of distrust or a threat. They often meet it with aggression because they're ready. I mean, just think if somebody called you up and said, "I'm coming to your house and I'm going to beat you up," and you think about that and your response. I mean, I don't know what else, but I mean, if you were in the corner and you knew that you had to defend yourself, imagine that frame of mind and living that way, and taking a huge amount of time to get out of that, to calm yourself down, to back off of that frame of mind. What's interesting to me is that this is not just seen in kids, all right? It's seen in adults who suffered abuse as well. This interplay, this effect of the environment on your genetic makeup, the genetic makeup of your cell. There was a study done on suicide victims, all right? And it showed these genetic markers from earlier abuse that were not present in the suicide victims who had not been abused, but it did in those who had abuse in their history. So it's still present. See, the information, the software is still there for a long, long time. They theorize that this can be reversed. If it can be turned off, I mean, it's like your cell, that gene that helps you self-regulate and de-stress is turned off because of the abuse. So they theorize that it can be turned on, but that has yet to be proven or found in research of human beings. All right? It's there from childhood up to adults. Some of the long-term effects of this inability to de-stress and to self-regulate leads to further psychological issues, because you can only take that. Your body can only handle that for so long without having some sort of side effect. And oftentimes, one of the effects, long-term effects, is psychological problems like anxiety or depression. That's very common. I know this firsthand, all right? I was abused when I was a child. And I grew up in one of those homes that was just, the child was on. I mean, you were just ready for alert all the time, because you just didn't know when what was going to happen, when it was going to happen. He didn't, you know, a lot of abusers, they show, like, warning signs. He didn't, because his was more sadistic. It wasn't anger that made him lash out. It was like, I think it was a psychological curiosity. I mean, he could have. So it wasn't like he was angry to do it. He was just, he kind of had like a pleasure in it. So there wasn't any predictors that of any time that it would ever happen. You couldn't like prepare, so you kind of really did have to be prepared all the time, because you never knew when it was going to come down the line. And traces of this problem from me 25 years ago is still, I mean, I've done a lot of work on myself. Yahweh has worked on me tremendously. I mean, but who in here thinks that once you get baptized and you raise up that you're just a perfect person and all your problems are fixed? No, he doesn't, because we have to work. We have to work with what we have. He requires that of us. He wants it from us. So he can't, I mean, he can totally fix anything that may be wrong with me on a biologic level. Okay, he could, absolutely. That, you know, some sort of expression in my genome or instruction in there, he could fix that, but he doesn't most of the time, because he wants us to work. Okay, and so I have been working, and I have done very well. I'm very proud of myself. You know, it says that you compare yourself to who you were, and then you can be proud, and I am very proud. Hallelujah. Yes. But there, no matter how much work I've put into this, it drives me insane that I can still see traces of this. It still affects me. I'll give you an example, and you know, you might not get this. Hopefully you do. But this is a couple of years ago, and we had the women's retreat, and I got invited to it. And Jody, you probably remember this. But okay. And one of my problems is my control. Like, I need to be in control of myself. I have to have my autonomy. Because, you remember, it's very hard to release that control to somebody, because then you're vulnerable. And you're kind of in their hands. And I don't like that feeling at all. I mean, when me and Yahweh be working this out, because I do the same thing with him sometimes. I'm like, no, I got this, thank you. And he understands, you know, he understands I got this problem. So, yes sir, I'm trying. Okay, so I had this problem with the women's retreat. So I didn't know very many people here, maybe like one or two, and I don't mean no. I mean, like, I had talked to a couple for about 5 minutes. And I got invited, and I was like, sure, yeah, you know. But as it came closer, you know, I got to go and live with these women. I got to live with these women for 3 days. Okay, and I don't know. But it was like I could never leave. Like I was going to prison. This is what it felt like. This is the way that my body reacted because I was going to an unknown place with unknown people, living with them, having to be around them, and there was a lot of distrust. There was a lot of suspicion going on in my brain, and these women are beautiful and wonderful and lovely, but it was going on in my mind. It was the fact that I felt like I was having to sacrifice some of my control over myself to go to this weekend, and so I felt this coming on, this anxiety, 3 days before it happened, 3 days before it hit, and I felt it, and I was like, yeah, I'm getting a lot of self-talk, a little stress management. Yeah, self-soothing. You're fine. You is beautiful. You is wonderful. Calm yourself down. But on the other end, in my brain, in my genome, my cells were just going crazy. My brain was going crazy. All that cortisol was just busting through. It was like red alert, red alert, red alert, danger, 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 impending doom. I mean, this is exactly what I felt. Impending doom, because control, vulnerability, pain, and hurt. And I couldn't. And I got into this mindset. No matter what I did, I was still very, I was pushed. That anxiety and that adrenaline and the physiological changes that occurred within me. And I'm talking like elevated breathing, accelerated heart rate, sweating. This is what I'm doing 3 days before. You remember this. The day that it was happening, I called my mom and I was like, I can't do this. And I was just like in a fight mode. I was in a fight mode because I thought, prison,
Really not that
threat,
bad.
abuse. I know, but that's what I thought. I thought I was going there, they're going to lock me up, they're going to hurt me. I'm going to a place where I can't just get up and leave if I want to. And so my own mind, my own history interplayed with this experience that had nothing to do with anybody else but me. Mm-hmm. And it affected how I could function. And I obviously couldn't function. I could not function because I was prepared for a battle. I was prepared for a threat because of my history, without any other person being involved in the situation. But the fact of having to even think about giving up some of your autonomy or your ownership or your sovereignty over yourself is such a threat. It is like being hit. It is like being warned. Yes, ma'am.
I can relate to that.
Please.
Because for the longest time in my life, I was afraid of somebody else having control over the food. Like if you're somewhere and they're like, no, you're only allowed to have, you don't have juice at this time, or I'm like, because I have to monitor my blood sugar too. But I didn't know it back then. That's not me part of it. But I was like, I still carry snacks in my purse to this day, and just because I'm like, oh, I have to trust somebody else to take care of me. Like, oh, I don't know if I can do that.
Yes.
Because that's being vulnerable. So I kind of I can get a little panic attack going on.
Yes.
If obviously I go and buy my own groceries and stuff. It's really nice. I like that. But I love to eat too. But yeah, just to think somebody else is in control of my food, it's like, unless, it's somebody that you already have experience with, and you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
Even then it's still a little scary, like, well, what if they're asleep and I'm in their house and I can't find anything to eat? Or,
Yes. Yeah.
It's ridiculous how the extreme anxiety I get about that.
Yes.
I'm a grown woman. I don't need to worry
Yeah. And why can't I just drive away? But never, I would tell myself that, while I'm self-soothing, is I can drive away. But it did not matter. My brain was still going crazy, crazy. And anyway, yes. So yeah, and I told that to just show a little example of how no matter how hard we try and how much we work at it, we can still be lacking And I am lacking in that area. I am a whole lot better than I was before. But I'm still not at the same level as somebody who's never been abused. And I don't know that I ever will. I don't know that my anxiety over having control and autonomy over myself will ever get to the level of somebody who has never been abused. I don't know. I think this goes back to the 4 talents and the 10 talents. Yes, ma'am.
Well, can I say something?
Please.
That, you know, like you said, go back to the autonomy of someone who's never been abused, but I can see what you're saying in that respect, but can you imagine that, what is it, Romans 8:28 says, Yahweh works all things to the good of those who are called
according to his purpose?
Yes.
It sounds familiar.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
I totally believe there's a purpose.
So even though Yahweh doesn't, I believe he doesn't want bad things to happen to us, because he doesn't violate our free will or other people's.
No.
So that, you know, bad things do happen. But is it possible that in the process, like, because of what you've experienced in your life, you're able to, you know, help more people because you have that empathy, you have that.
Yes.
You know, where someone else who doesn't have it, that's good that they didn't go through it, but they might not be the one that somebody would go and say, hey, I need help with this situation. You know, they would be.
Right. Yes, ma'am. No, I believe there's a purpose to every pain. He makes a purpose out of every pain that we experience. And that is not, I do believe that whatever we feel, whatever we experience will be turned into good that he can use for others. Okay? And that is my point of all of this. That goes to my point. What's the problem? Okay. All right. That goes to my point. Okay? Is that we are all different. Every one of us are different. We are made up by different environments and different genetics and different genomes instructing those genetics. All of us are different. We cannot have a stuck standard. We have to do our best. Our best. And certain aspects of my best, pale in comparison to yours. And some of yours pale in comparison to mine. It kind of reminds me of my kids, okay? All right, it reminds me of this with my kids. One of my kids, I had 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, and I always made them the girls. They were a lot older. My youngest son, and he's 9. He's 9 years, 8 years from his sister that's above him. Whatever, 7. I'm not ever good at that. That's one of my faults. Whatever. There's a big age gap, so, you know, I always made the girls, you know, get straight A's. They could get a B. I wasn't really happy with the B's, but I accepted that, okay. And at C's, they were grounded. They lost everything. I was like, you know, no, you're doing your best. And I know a C is not your best, so you're going to lose it, and you're going to be grounded from this and this until, like, your 3-week progress report. If your 3-week progress report, then, you know, if you have that C raised up to at least a B, then you can have your stuff back. So then Shelton come along. Well, Shelton, at 15 months old, if y'all don't know about this, he had cancer. He got leukemia when he was 15 months old. And so he spent 4.5 years in chemotherapy treatment. All right? So by the time, and praise Yahweh, he's good. Praise Yahweh. He went to kindergarten. He went up to 1st grade. And then, so when he got off of chemo, the doctors had told us, you know, because he had, I mean, basically it's acid, it's toxic, running through your veins. That's what chemo is. I mean, it's poison. And so the doctors told us, you know, it's likely. We studied a lot. We see a lot of kids at this age, with this stuff going on, it's very likely that he could have some developmental issues, especially when it comes to like logic problem, like math problems. Okay. He can be creative, but as far as this, he might have some developmental issues on math and a couple other things. So he went to school, and I think he was in first grade, second grade, I don't know. But he and he made a C in math. He made C's in math. He made A's and B's and everything else, but he made C's in like first grade and second grade. And the girls were just constantly ragging on me. You know, I like, you know, there's always in their brother's business. Always. You know, they were just like, well, you make us get A's and B's, and he gets to have a C, and it's not fair. And, you know, I used to tell him Tindy biscuits. All right, Tindy biscuits. Hey, my kids know what that means. There's a story, there's a movie, I don't know what it is, I can't remember. But a brother is saying something about another brother, and that brother says, hey, you know, he was making biscuits. It's like Tindy biscuits. That is like, I got this. Thank you very much for your help. But give your mom a little bit of credit for knowing something about her own kids. Thank you. You know, because I don't know. I'm not Yahweh. You know, but I mean, I'm going with what Darcy said, and they said he could have a problem with math, so he has a C in math, and I'm like, okay, well, at least he's passing. I'm good. You know? Yeah, you better make a A or B in math, but. You know, Shelton, okay, make a C, I'm great. That's great. Make a C. Because his standards were different. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The girls were like, whoa, why can't we have, you know, it's all supposed to be the same and equal and fair and all this mess. You know, and I would tell them all their life, I told them Tender biscuits. Tender biscuits, I got this, thank you. And they still say that today, and I still tell it to them. Sometimes I think we need to tender our biscuits a little bit, okay? I think that we need to trust Yahweh to know that He knows His children. Mm-hmm. And He knows what they can do, what their best is, and what isn't. And instead, like the girls, you know, sometimes we get into this fixation of that's not their best. And, you know, the more I learn about it, the more I see about biology and environment and their development on their developmental influence on who you are, it scares me more and more and more that I just don't know. Just like my girls didn't know why there was a difference with their brother and theirs. Sometimes we don't know. And I think we need to trust Him that He knows. He knows what's going on inside them. We don't. We look at the outside. We just assume. But like the guy said today that was given the message, you know, everybody has a story. That was my story. You have your own story that affects your behavior, on what you can do and what your best is, what influences your best. And I don't know that, but Yahweh does. And I trust Him. We need to trust Him to know what He knows, to know that He knows what He's doing, you know, that He knows what He's doing with His own kids. Because I know that we are not here by chance, okay? Mm-hmm. At all. We are not here by chance. I was watching a TED Talks. Anybody know what TED Talks means?
Yes.
It's like the YouTube for nerds. All right? And that's what it is, because I love it. I mean, it is like video after video after video of educational stuff like psychology and science and business. And I was watching this TED Talks and these statistics that were done by some mathematicians, okay? And they figured out this probability. The odds of you, being alive, being born. The odds of you, Deborah, you, Stephanie, you, Bethany, you specifically, you with your genetics, you with your parents meeting, your parents staying long enough to make a commitment, your parents reproducing, that sperm joining that egg, specifically to produce that set of genes and your DNA. The odds of that are 1 in 400 trillion. You.
What's that number again?
1 in 400 trillion.
I don't know how to
is
count
to
that
bring
far.
you into being. You.
Wow.
Specifically, Deborah.
Wow.
1 in 400 trillion to bring Stephanie in. That is pretty powerful. So when I heard this, when I heard this number, I thought, wow. I mean, how special is that? 1 in 400 trillion? I mean, you've heard about 1 in a million, but no. This goes way beyond that. 1 in 400 trillion. That he, I used to tell my kids, watch out, be careful, because I made you from scratch. I made that ankle from scratch. Don't you be breaking it, acting a fool. Be careful. Because there's only one of you. And it's the same with us. He made us specifically from scratch to be who we are. To be this individual and specific individual person. When I heard this number, I kind of went crazy, and I spent the next 6 hours wondering or figuring out how the probability or the percentage of you specifically. What?
Your phone's at 10%.
Okay. Hold on a second. Probability of you becoming. No, I'm sorry. I began to wonder what the odds are of someone being in this assembly, okay? Using that probability. That's what sparked this. And I marked the next 6 hours on coming up with this. These odds, all right? Sorry, I don't do well with distractions. I lose my train of thought bad. All right.
That's a lot.
That's the 1 in 400 trillion, yes. Okay, so the next one is the odds of you, Deborah, as Deborah, or me, Carrie, as Carrie, or Stephanie as Stephanie, walking into this assembly, staying long enough to form an attachment here, deciding to commit, going through baptism. That number is 1 in 168 quintillion 800 quadrillion.
Oh, wow.
You were handpicked and hand-selected. You're not here by accident. Just to put this in a little bit perspective, okay? This is like picking one postage stamp that is you, all right? Out of 125,000 Earths, Earth, 125,000 Earths, completely covered in postage stamps. You.
Whoa.
We're hand-selected to be here.
We're chosen people.
Amen.
Wow.
Yeah. Because the odds of just anybody coming in here, yeah, but the odds of you coming in here, being who you are, what you're made of, coming in here and becoming a member of this assembly is that number.
It makes it easier to trust Yahweh when you start getting that perspective and say,
Yes.
He knows what he's doing.
Exactly.
You gotta trust him more.
Yes. We have to. We have to trust and have faith that the person in this assembly right next to us is here for that same, the same odds.
Mm-hmm.
Are there for that person. Go ahead. You missed the grand finale. But, yeah. So, anyway, that helps me put things in perspective and say, you know what, let's stop. I want to tend to my biscuits. And maybe y'all can, add that to your little repertoire. Sometimes we do need to tend our biscuits and, and trust Yahweh in the fact that he knows what's going on. He knows who's here. He knows why they're here. And it is all in his design. Every bit of it. And they're hand-selected just like you are. So, that's it.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
That's great. Claire, would you like to, right? Would you like to say closing prayer, or you don't have to? You don't know. I know I didn't ask you ahead of time.
Almighty Heavenly Father, we come to you through your Son, Yeshua, just thanking you so much, Father, for being willing to give your Son for us, Father, that you can see us through him, and that we're made pure, and that you know that you know everything about us, and that we have struggles and anxieties and expectations and things, but you're working with us, each one of us in our own life every day, to become closer to you. And just thank you for Carrie's presentation to remind us of how you see us, and that we do not need to see everybody on the same playing field, but to look at their hearts. And just like with Samuel, when he came to Jesse, and he's looking at his sons, and you cared about David's heart the most, and you see our hearts, not the way we look. Please help us to see one another in that way. And thank you for the reminders that you have blessed us with through Carrie's presentation, and just for bringing us here and help us to just draw closer to you every day, to turn to you when we have struggles, and to just remember you at every moment with each person we meet, how you see us, and that you created us each individually to love that about one another, to really truly love each other the way that we should in Yeshua. And I just thank you for this Sabbath day and our fellowship, and I just want to glorify you. In Yeshua's name we pray. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. So, is Nash finished?
Okay.